So today's session invites us to look at Pride, not only as a celebration, but as a movement rooted in protest, courage, and the long fight for civil rights. I'm delighted to be joined by Jim Glennon and Beverly Smith from Pride UK Training and Consultancy. And so Jim is a founding member of Pride UK with over 30 years experience managing people, projects and policy in leading LGBTQ plus organisations. He now leads on inclusive policy and development for HR professionals. And we're also joined by Beverly, who's an experienced manager, trainer and assessor with a long background in care setting and LGBTQ plus inclusion. She now leads Pride UK's work on delivering training for inclusion in the care sector. So today, if you have any questions at all, throw them into the chat box and there'll be time at the end for Jim and Beverly to answer them. So that's enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Jim and Beverly, who are going to guide us through today's session.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, folks. Really glad to be here today. We're going to broadly speak to slides for most of the time we're together. Don't be too worried about that. They're visual slides. There isn't much text. Either Beverly or I will just lead on some of them, which are not absolutely explicit. I'm going to bring them up in just half a minute, but just briefly to say, as Tom's mentioned, I've worked in broadly health and social care throughout my life as a middle manager, but also as a trainer. The thing that I share with Beverly is I've also managed HR and I'm a CIPD member. And Beverly, do you want to say a little bit about yourself before we slide on?
Yeah, there's not a lot to add other than I'm a fellow of the CIPD and I started my career in HR, but since then it's been quite varied, quite a lot of project management roles across voluntary, private and public sector, but most recently as a registered manager for a domiciliary care business. So and I've supported LGBTQ charities for most of my adult life, really. I came out when I was 20. So it's been quite a long time. Let's put it that way.
And just to share in coming out, I identify as a gay man. So I'm just going to bring up my slides. So if you just give me 10 seconds, folks. Hopefully, if I'm at the right space, you can see a big squiggly rainbow. You can. Okay, so let's make a start. So we're looking at how Pride, and this is UK Pride Month, you'll be aware, developed and also influenced the organisation of civil rights of LGBTQ people. And just a little bit of time at the end, we just focus a little bit on where we are at the moment in the UK. We've already introduced ourselves, Jim and Beverly. So we're going to say a little bit about the organisation, only 2 minutes, and then look at about the time before there was anything called Pride, when LGBTQ people were criminalised, not just in this country, but in this country we're going to focus on. And then a little bit about the movement towards from civil rights protests to what is now often seen as a jamboree, as a fun day out for people who attend any local or national Pride events. And just a little bit, not a lot, about legal aspects towards the end of the session. I'm going to move through our own slides. This is why we do what we do. We recognise, and all the research says, including CIPD research, that LGBTQ people still don't feel safe at work. There are different studies about this, but on the whole, I would argue confidently that about a third of people who are LGBTQ plus don't identify at their workplace for all sorts of different reasons. And also, if things go wrong for them, they don't complain. I think we'd all accept, and this is not just about LGBTQ, I put this in blue because it can apply to many other aspects, but inclusion in the workplace is very important for mental health and well-being, productivity, which people often don't think about, bringing together different ideas and perspectives for creativity, and generally about our reputation as an organisation and our brand. We work with business and government. We've just recently started work with Brent Council in London on our Pride UK quality accreditation. And we are at the moment out and about doing different things, podcasts, face-to-face training. That's Beverly on the left corner there, speaking at a conference. That's me on the right corner, giving evidence to the Women Inequalities Committee a couple of years ago about LGBTQ inequalities. So let's think about the world before it was okay, inverted commas, to be LGBTQ in the UK. And Beverly's going to pick up on a couple of slides.
Okay, so this is a picture of a doorway, which originally is still there, but originally used to lead to a club called Gateways in London, which was one of the very few places that lesbians could meet. It was down in a basement. It's very dark, no lights, smoky, and you only got to know about this bar if someone told you about it. There was no advertising. But here's a lovely picture taken from inside in the late 50s, early 60s. As you can see, it's quite a dim, dark place. But it was one of the few places that women could meet and have fun and also, you know, express how they feel about other women in that space. But it was a secret place in the sense that it wasn't generally known. I think one of the other things to say is that a lot of women, lesbian women who had children in the 50s, 60s, 70s, actually right up to the mid-80s, had their children, would lose their children in custody cases. There's quite a lot of evidence in the statutes and notes of various hearings that say lesbians were inherently violent and therefore made unfit mothers. So children were taken away from them. I mean, I know I have friends who even to this day haven't been able to repair that relationship with their lost children. Some have, and it's been very positive for them, but a lot haven't. So that whole concept of family for women who grew up in this era is quite different.
Thanks, Beverly. People went to prison. When I was growing up as a very young gay identifying adolescent, people were still going to prison. People go to prison just for being in a same-sex relationship for between, on average, 18 months to 2 years. Mostly gay men. It was mostly men, bisexual men, and some trans people as well. And if you went to prison, it was horrendous in prison because you were treated as the lowest of the low. But also when you came out, the press was pretty merciless at the time. I mean, this is a national newspaper in 1954, but I remember in the 70s growing up in a small village in Lancashire, and our local newspaper, Rossendale Free Press, would frequently put stories of local people who'd gone to prison for being gay. And just to be clear about this, the way it could happen is a neighbour would notice they've got a gay couple moving next door. I'm thinking now possibly two gay men. They'd spot some intimacies and things going about, and if they weren't happy about that, they could complain to the police, and if the police hadn't got anything better to do, the police could come round and try and surprise the gay men. And often this was done early in the morning, and if they caught them in bed together, that could alone be reason to go to prison, go to jail.
This is a picture of April Ashley, who was a model, a very successful model in the 60s, moved in very high social circles and had a very well-paid, successful career. She was actually outed by the press as a trans woman, and as a result lost everything: her career, her home, her income, and life became very difficult for her. You can see here, this is an article that was in the press about her. She'd been widely accepted until she was outed.
Thanks, Beverly.
She since did actually then go on to be a strong advocate for trans rights, and she did actually get I think it was an MBE or MBE for her work. But obviously her early career and this happening to her was devastating at the time.
Presented by the Queen, I seem to remember. I don't know how the Queen felt about that, but the royal family, the monarchy was moving a little bit as well. I live down the road. I'm in Brixton, South London. I live down the road from Camberwell, and this is the Maudsley Hospital flying LGBTQ flag. But when I spoke to their nurses in a training session a few years ago, I reminded them that the Maudsley Hospital pioneered electric shock treatment for mostly gay men, not just, but mostly gay men. It started in the 1960s, went up to the 1980s. And this is one of the electric machines that would be used to give electric shocks to, on the whole, homosexuals, we call it then men, to make them heterosexual. This is a quote from somebody who was working at the Maudsley, who was a new person. I don't know if they're a medical student or just a new person, saying, first year, all I did was shove electricity down at homosexual patients. They watched pictures of pretty men on a screen with a lever they had to pull to avoid their electric shocks. And that was all there was to it. Nothing very scientific. It was against the law what they were doing. That's how it was presented to us. He never thought about the morality of what we were doing. The final comment linking into the prison, that people were mostly referred from courts as a voluntary patient's alternative to prison. So what would happen is somebody would be arrested. They'd be told you're going to go to jail. But if you opt for electric shock treatment, you might not go to jail. And so a lot of gay men had electric shock treatment to avoid going to prison and the shame that would cause on their family. And the key thing we're trying to make here is this is not that long ago. This is when I was a kid. Yeah, and things did not change in the UK until 67 and only changed marginally in that you didn't have to go to jail. There are a lot of other problems which we'll come on to, but you didn't have to go to jail. So that was a sense of the culture at the time. But the beginnings of what we now call Pride, actually, we need to cross the way to the States and something called Stonewall. There are a couple of charities in the UK named after Stonewall because it was a bar at the time. Like the UK, homosexuality was illegal pretty well throughout the USA at that time. And there was a bar that was used by people called the Stonewall Inn in New York. There weren't that many, and it would be called a gay bar at the time. There weren't many, gay, by the way, gay was seen as a generic term, very much like queer is today for people who choose not to conform to traditional heterosexuality. But the Stonewall Bar was very, very popular in New York, particularly because it had a good music policy and there was dancing late night. This is something scrawled on the wall of the bar: gay prohibition corrupts cops, feeds mafia, which refers to the fact that it was mafia run and controlled. That meant that, I'll use the phrase that was used at the time, homosexuals were overcharged for everything, to get in, to have a drink, to do this, to do that, because it was one of the only places that they could go to. And occasionally the police would raid, and the police were involved with the mafia at the time as well. So it wasn't always a safe place. Here's an example of a raid notice saying that the place has been raided at that time. This is one of the few good quality photos that are of the actual night of the raid of the Stonewall Bar, when it was raided by police. And for the first time, people decided they weren't going to put up with it anymore. They wanted to take a zero tolerance approach to what was going on. There was an initial fight back from people who were there in the bar and people who were supporters who came on board. And this is just an example of something that seems a small thing, but the jukebox was destroyed by the police deliberately. The jukebox, apparently, from all the accounts, was a really fine jukebox. It had a great selection of tunes you could dance to, but also it was really good quality music, which was relatively rare at the time. So everyone could participate in having a good night out and a dance, and that was kicked to bits. And partly because of that, and relevant that the music that was playing at the time the bar was raided, was I heard it through the grapevine. Before internet, information got out and people started to congregate around the bar, and there was the first, what we think is the first spontaneous demonstration stroke rally stroke march of queer people in New York at that time because of that particular situation with the bar. But what came out of that was early political activism of LGBTQ people, not just gay men, who had just sucked it up for so many years and suddenly decided to organize politically, to get together in groups, in meetings and saying, we must change this. We do not have any power. We did not have any power at that time, but we must think about how we can organize to influence the politicians and make a difference. And out of that became the first marches, which are often called Christopher Street marches, rather than, as we say today, Gay Pride. Here we've got a banner from Gay Liberation Front, which is the grouping. It was very loose, very informal, not very tightly structured or hierarchical, very much grassroots at the time of people marching. Now, to march at this time, it was going to be very, very scareful. These people are looking happy and smiling, but to walk down a main street at this time was going to be putting yourself at risk from violence. So this on the right is one of the flyers for the original, what we'd say is the pre, what we now call Gay Pride march of today. So Christopher Street, Gay Liberation Day, 1970. This is New York, not here in London, in the UK. And again, to make the point about coming together, two women or two men, and putting your arms, showing affection, was putting yourself at risk from the crowd at the time. This is a quote from the New York Times. We'll never have the freedom and civil rights we deserve as human beings unless we stop hiding in closets and in the shelter of anonymity. We've got to come out. So these phrases are starting to be used. We now talk about coming out, and it's not just used now about being LGBTQ, but originally it was about coming out into the open and stop being ashamed, or else people will go on treating us as freaks. This march is an affirmation and a declaration of our new pride. Now, that word pride starts to be used more in the early movement of LGBTQ civil rights. And it says at the bottom here, this is somebody on that first fightback march. So this then comes to the UK, and Beverly's going to pick up a few slides here for us.
Okay, so this is, I think this slide speaks for itself, really. This is really the beginning of things. Some local meetings there, and the beginnings really of the Gay Liberation Front. I mean, in the summer following Stonewall fight back, an LSE student actually started campaigning and setting up groups here, and they started a branch of the American Gay Liberation Front in London. That first meeting was held in the LSE in the autumn of 1970, actually, and that started to build the momentum here in the UK for the first Pride marches.
Thanks, Beverly. And LSE, of course, is our London School of Economics, which is still going today.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a picture from one of the first Pride. Note the police presence. So basically, all the way along both sides of the march, actually. This expresses it quite well, I think. You can see, and you know, from my own experience, the first Pride I went to in London was in '85, actually, and it was still like that then. I mean, it was incredibly liberating for me to see all these other people, and not feel that I was alone in the world. And it, you know, that was really quite empowering. But it's also intimidating to have this heavy police presence. And I mean, a lot of them are looking the other way anyway, but there's definitely no interaction at all. So that's how it was in the early days, but we were there. This is another picture of Gay Pride. I mean, what I like about that one is the fact that actually we haven't got a separate route marked out for us. The buses are still there, so people could get potentially run over, but people are smiling there, which I think makes this a really positive photograph for me, certainly.
I share what you just said, Beverly, about being together with a wider group. These are some of the people. This is a picture taken a couple of years ago of some of the people who were on that early Pride March. Most of them are still very active, alive and well today. Sadly, Andrew Levinson on the back towards the right with the bright tie has died. I think everybody else is still going, but these were people who were part of both the organisation and taking part, and you'll recognise some of their faces. We haven't got time to pick up all their accounts, but we're just going to give a few references from within that group to give you an idea of what it was like. So Tom Robinson, people in the UK, some of you who are younger, who are my age at least, might remember Tom Robinson led a band, a rock band, had a famous song called Glad to Be Gay, which made the charts. Wasn't a high charter in the UK British top 20, but I think it was like 16 or 18 or something like that. I just want to share a brief story, which was he was on Radio 1 when I was like 13 or 14, and he was talking about being gay, and that was quite controversial at the time. And I remember him calling out and said, around the country, there are going to be people who are hiding in their bedrooms listening to this broadcast because they're scared to tell their parents about identifying. He wouldn't have said LGBTQ. He probably would have said lesbian or gay, I think, at that time. And he just said, look, if you're out there listening to this, you're okay. It's all right. You're going to get through this. And I was one of the kids who was listening. And it really deeply affected me. And just to make the point how either as LGBTQ people ourselves or as supporters and allies in our workplaces through HR, by actually making a point of inclusion within our workplace, it can have an impact that you don't know at the time. There are people came up to me at parties decades later who used to talk to me about people like Tom Robinson, who had said positive things at the time. And this is what Tom said at the time. He said, gay was then a word used very much like the word queer today. It meant not just what we mean today, homosexual men, but it was an all-embracing term, including homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and non-binary people. And when gay people took to the streets in Pride, it was like the Big Bang. This mass potential had been tightly balled up and contained, full of energy, and the message of gay liberation arrived like a match tossed into a fireworks factory. Peter Tatchell, who you'll know possibly as a civil rights person internationally around LGBTQ rights, says, we came up with the idea of calling the march Gay Pride to go against the idea that as LGBTQ people, we should be ashamed. About a third of the march that he was on were to varying degrees hostile, a lot of glowering, disapproving looks, some shouted abuse. Another third just gawped in disbelief that LGBTQ people would dare to show their faces in public so confidently. But at least a third was encouraging and supportive, gave thumbs up and clapped as we passed by and shouting things like, good on you.
Okay, and this is Mayor Twistle. She was born in Wales, actually, but moved to London in the early 70s, and she was one of the people that was involved in the early Gay Liberation Front meetings. She's an artist and a campaigner and has done a lot for LGBTQ rights. This is her quotes from her about her first Pride. So it was frightening. She had to put on a brave face. There were so many police, as you could see that from some of those earlier photos. Lots of people didn't go to that first march because they were too scared. And I didn't blame them. Walking with a wall of police on each side of you is intimidating. Andrew Lumsden. Jim, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up. Yeah, Andrew was a writer and a journalist. He worked for the Times, amongst other newspapers. And when he tried to get stories written, I mean, he was a general journalist doing all sorts of different things, but he was reasonably high profile. When he tried to get stories written about the emerging civil rights movement in terms of LGBTQ, the Times kept on knocking his copy back and saying, no, for different reasons, they weren't published. So eventually, he was one of the people who set up the early newspapers for gay times and things like that. And also, he was one of the first people in terms of organising the first Gay Pride. What he says here is, on that first march, every single person had begun to change how they felt about themselves and to reject what society said about us. The thinking was, if I come out as gay, I would affect anything up to a dozen other gay people and that it would ripple outwards. And it did. I think we were all, in one way or another, conscious that what we were doing was historic.
And this is Ros Kavanagh. She was, again, a very strong campaigner for trans rights. And this is what she has to say. Somebody told me about Pride, and so she told other people So it was all word of mouth at that time. I came down on the coach from Oxford. She was just coming up to 23 years of age. And you can't remember much except what she was wearing. Oxford red platforms and purple paisley hot pants. Very embarrassing. But I'm sure she looked absolutely fab on the day. I mean, I think the key point about that is what she says about pride being an occasion to be totally oneself in public, with the security of knowing that lots of the people around you are all doing the same thing, and not having to apologise or trying to avoid being noticed. Okay, so this is a very early picture from London's Lesbian and Gay Pride, 1983. And a few more here. So this is showing Manchester Pride. I actually lived up in Manchester from the very early 90s, and their Pride marches were really quite substantial in size. But this is showing that things are beginning to move out now more regionally. It's not just London stuff that's going on. People are gathering across the country and across the rest of the UK too.
So let's look at some pictures of Pride today. These are just, a lot of these are just basic shots. By the way, the photographer we're using in this, it's a mix of archive photography, which you've been able to see. Some of it actually from, you know, museums, but it's splattered also with some of our own. So these are some pictures I took last year at last year's Pride in London. And the main thing to emphasize, and the reason why we've chosen this selection, is how we've moved from those early pictures, black and white pictures that Beverly spoke to, which was very much a march, a civil rights march. And we would, I think most of us, Beverly, I think you might just, I think you'd agree. We like to keep that idea alive. That has not changed. The civil rights is still here, but there's a much more emphasis on celebration, on carnival, on fun. And we get a lot of tourists now coming to London's Pride, which is one of the biggest in the world. So these are just some pictures from last year's Pride, just emphasizing the fun, the celebration, the fact that we've now not just people of colour, but it really has become a multicultural event. And this is the two family groups that I bumped into. We got chatting and they were happy to be pictured in this slideshow. So the professionals getting involved. Beverly, do you want to pick up and say anything about any of this? I don't know.
Well, and the police too. The person in the front there, the policeman in the front there is not looking too happy, but the guy next to him smiling. So it seems much less formal. And obviously people of different ages, older people too. And these are some people actually from and this bus photo is from a charity called Opening Doors, which unfortunately no longer exists. But this is where Jim and I met, because Jim was working there and I was volunteering, and we provided support services for older LGBTQ people. And one of the things we did was provide a bus so that they could go to Pride and be involved in the march, the procession, but actually be able to manage that if they had mobility issues or just felt that the size of the crowd was a bit overwhelming for them. It was great fun being on those buses, actually. I miss that. And now we have a Black Pride, which was set up relatively early on, and Bi Pride too, and Trans Pride. And I think also we have an International Pride Day now. I think I just would like to say about the Trans Pride situation. I feel that, and what Jim mentioned just a few slides ago, actually, that we like to hold on to the fact that this is still about civil rights. It's great that we feel that we can have fun and a party and a carnival and then everyone's welcome. But this is a personal view, I suppose I should say that, really. But I feel that particularly our trans community are really under some serious threat at the moment. They're having some serious stuff about their lives, and So I think it is really important that we hang on to the whole idea of, this it's not just being a party, it is actually a protest to a certain extent, but it's certainly about civil rights.
Thanks, Bill. So just in our closing 5 minutes or so, just very briefly, I'm sure we're all aware of this, but just to remind ourselves how far we've gone from those very early slides when it was actually illegal when I was a young gay man. In fact, when in my first relationship, I was under the age of consent. The age of consent was 21. I was in a relationship when I was under 21. Theoretically, I could have had a criminal prosecution. I didn't. And there's a lot going on in politics just at the moment. Let's leave that on one side. We haven't got time. I want to highlight here is these are prime ministers who have done something, some just a little bit, some more around LGBTQ rights. We have not had a lot going on, we would argue, in the last year or two, I'm afraid. John Major slightly opened the door, didn't do a lot. The Prime Minister, John Major in the UK, Conservative Prime Minister, but he met with Ian McKellen and people from the original Stonewall rights group. The major legislation has happened from 2000 under the Blair governments. And then Brown, but other things have happened. This is not a party political point. Just to remind ourselves, without going into detail, that we've had 10 years of quite radical change from the year 2000. So you didn't used to be able to serve in the armed forces. From 2000, you could. I talked about age of consent. From 2001, everybody is equal in terms of age of consent for sexual relationships. It wasn't the case before that. Adopting children, the one thing I wish if I'd been a younger, well, if I was a gay man today, I'd be looking to have a family. And that was not possible for gay men of my age at that time. There was legislation banning talking about LGBTQ in schools, and that was scrapped in 2003. Hate crime came in 2003 as well, which also affected crimes related to transphobia, biphobia, homophobia. Civil Partnership Act, I'm looking to be in a civil partnership, which I couldn't have before 2004. Gender Recognition Act, Fertilization and Embryology Act being rolled out to same-sex couples, and the big one, the Equality Act of 2010. And I just thought this would be interesting to see. Just one of the big changes is the number of people who are openly LGBTQ today, and these are just the ruling government party at the moment of Labour, but there are far more people in Parliament. And clearly that makes a big difference if there are people who are able to be out and actually involved in influencing change. And I think that relates to us within HR and our work and our networks, as well as it does to the leading politicians of the day. But this is a big one, just picking up one of the points that Beverly was making. There is a map that's been done now for about 8 or 9 years, it might even be 10 years, of Europe and where different countries are with LGBTQ rights. Those brilliant 10 years, since then, the UK has slipped down the idea of being a leader of LGBTQ rights. We used to be number 1 in Europe. We're now about, and I should know this, I can't remember, it's 22 or 23. We're not considered to be inclusive of LGBTQ people as we were 15 years ago. The number 1 is Spain. I'm doing a webinar this afternoon with some people from Spain, and we're talking about this fact that they now have become the number 1 because of the progress of the governments about legislation. Not that different in some ways to what we did from 2000, but unfortunately we have rolled back, we would argue, since those days. So good on Spain. But since a Supreme Court ruling about April of last year, you'll be aware, and sorry for this is slightly rude words, and I thought about whether I should include it, but let's go for it. It was in last year's Pride. There are a number of people who were protesting about the changes which could mean that trans people could no longer use the toilets that they had been used to using for a long time. And ridiculous that these human rights issues are reused to things like toilets. And this is much bigger than that. I'm sure you're aware of the underlying issues, but this is somebody with a leave us alone in our toilets picture. Just a quick reminder that where we are at the moment, we do a whole webinar on this and we haven't got time to look at the details, but I want to reassure you, if you're having responsibility for HR, that we still need to abide by statutory duties which are still in place about not having any discrimination or harassment including towards trans people in the workplaces that we are responsible for. And we still need to think about reasonable adjustments, assisting people in those workplaces. And that includes gender-related adjustments. Again, more pictures from last year's Pride in London. None of us are free until all of us are free. We'll fight till we win. So it's becoming a little bit more agitational, and I share this. Beverly, I don't think I've mentioned this to you, just on behalf of Pride UK. We've been invited to a reception at Parliament next week, number 10. And what's going to happen at that reception, I'm sure, is a lot of other LGBTQ individuals and organisations are going to be talking to the people who turn up for that. And there will be some ministers who will turn up, give a little talk and things like that, about the fact that we feel that we're going a little bit, no, not a little bit, we are going backwards with some of our rights within the UK. Out of interest, I was in Durham Council doing a talk a few months ago about LGBTQ inclusion. Ironically, the week after, the local council, now Reform dominated, had said they were going to remove all LGBTQ flags in Pride Month and withdraw all their funding from Pride because they didn't think that was something that the council should be involved in. So there are changes. But anyway, regardless, happy Pride Month UK. Everyone celebrates Pride slightly differently up and down the country, but just in London and generally we say this is our Pride Month. It's been great to chat to you all. We might have probably just a few minutes for any questions or contributions that people might want to make.
Whilst anyone's typing any questions in, just want to say thank you very much, Jim and Beverly, for your session today. It's been really valuable. It comes at a really important point of that awareness calendar as well. You know, it being Pride Month as well. It's really important that this message goes out. So what I'm going to do